What happens when Hollywood royalty walks into the view and leaves an entire studio speechless? In just 34 seconds, one question from Sunny Hostin would trigger a confrontation so explosive that security would have to step in, cameras would stop rolling, and Denzel Washington would walk off set in a moment that nobody saw coming. The morning started like any other episode. The lights were bright, the audience was buzzing with excitement, and Denzel Washington sat down on that famous table, ready to promote his latest film. The makeup artists had just finished their final touches. The producers were running through last-minute notes. The audience had been warmed up by a comedian who got them laughing and clapping. Everything was running smoothly. Everything was normal. This was supposed to be a simple interview, a feel-good conversation about his career, his new movie, maybe some laughs along the way. The kind of segment that makes viewers smile over their morning coffee. The kind of interview that everyone enjoys. But what came next would turn this ordinary morning show into one of the most talked-about television moments in recent memory. Whoopi Goldberg started things off with her usual charm. She smiled at Denzel and said, "It's so good to have you here, Denzel. We've been looking forward to this all week." Denzel nodded, his signature calm demeanor on full display. "Thank you for having me. It's always good to be here." Joy Behar jumped in next, asking about his preparation for the role. "You're known for really diving deep into your characters. What was it like preparing for this one?" Denzel leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as he talked about his craft. "You know, Joy, I think every role teaches you something new. This character, he's complex. He's dealing with loss, with redemption, with finding his way back to who he really is. I spent months just trying to understand his pain." The audience clapped. Everything seemed normal, Sarah. Haynes asked about working with the director, and Denzel gave a thoughtful answer about collaboration and trust. Alyssa Farah Griffin asked about the filming locations, and Denzel described the beautiful landscapes they'd captured on camera. The conversation was flowing smoothly, professionally, exactly how these interviews usually go. But then, Sunny Hostin decided to take things in a different direction. You could see it coming if you were paying close attention. The way she straightened her papers, the way she cleared her throat, the way she glanced at her notes and then back at Denzel with a look that said she had something specific on her mind, something she had been planning to ask. She shifted in her seat, that look on her face that regular viewers know all too well. It's the look that says she's about to ask something controversial, something that's going to make people uncomfortable. She looked directly at Denzel and said, "I want to talk about something more serious. Your career has been incredible, obviously, but don't you think you've benefited from a certain privilege in Hollywood? I mean, you've had opportunities that a lot of other actors, especially those from more marginalized communities, haven't had access to." The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension drop like a heavy blanket over everyone there. Whoopi's eyes went wide. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her smile fading instantly. Sarah looked down at her notes, suddenly very interested in the papers in front of her. Alyssa glanced at the producers off camera, her expression asking them silently if this was really happening, if they were really going in this direction. The audience members looked at each other, confused by the sudden shift in tone. One moment they had been enjoying a pleasant conversation, and now the air itself felt different, heavier, charged with something uncomfortable. Denzel's expression changed. The warmth that had been there just moments before disappeared. His jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, the kind of breath you take when you're trying very hard to stay calm. "I'm sorry, what?" Sunny didn't back down. If anything, she doubled down. "I'm just saying that Hollywood has historically favored certain narratives, certain faces, certain stories. And while your success is undeniable, we have to acknowledge the systemic advantages that allowed you to get where you are." Denzel stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured, but you could hear the frustration building underneath. Every word was deliberate, chosen carefully. "Sunny, I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My father was a Pentecostal minister who worked long hours serving his congregation, people who didn't have much themselves. My mother worked in a beauty parlor, standing on her feet all day, doing hair for women in our community. We didn't have money. We didn't have connections in the entertainment industry. We didn't have anyone paving the way for us. What we had was faith in God, hard work that never stopped, and a belief that if you give everything you have to your craft, if you study and sacrifice and push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of, you might, just might, get a chance to show what you can do. That was my reality. That was my life." Whoopi tried to step in. "Denzel, I think what Sunny is trying to say," but Sunny cut her off. No, Whoopi, let me finish. Denzel, nobody is questioning your talent. But we need to have honest conversations about how the industry works, about who gets opportunities and who doesn't. That's all I'm saying. Denzel's hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were turning white from the pressure. Honest conversations? You want honest conversations? Let me give you honest. I auditioned hundreds of times. Hundreds. I got rejected hundreds of times. I heard no more times than I can count. I took acting classes at night while working shifts during the day just to pay my rent in a tiny apartment that barely had heat in the winter. I studied Shakespeare until my eyes hurt from reading. I studied August Wilson until I knew his words better than my own. I studied Chekhov, Miller, Williams, every single thing I could get my hands on because I knew deep in my soul that being good wasn't going to be enough. Being talented wasn't going to be enough. I had to be excellent. I had to be undeniable. I had to be so good that they couldn't ignore me, couldn't pass me over, couldn't make excuses for why I shouldn't get the role. That was my reality. That was what it took. The audience was dead silent now. You couldn't hear a single cough, a single whisper, a single movement. Some people were nodding their heads slowly, moved by what Denzel was saying, understanding the depth of what he was sharing. Others looked shocked, their mouths slightly open, unable to believe this was actually happening on their favorite morning show. A few people in the front row had tears in their eyes. This was not the lighthearted celebrity interview anyone had expected when they walked into that studio this morning. This was real. This was raw. This was a man defending his entire life's work against someone who seemed determined to diminish it. Sarah tried to calm things down. I think we're all just trying to have a dialogue here. Maybe we can. Sunny waved her hand dismissively. Sarah, this is important. We can't just sweep these conversations under the rug because they make people uncomfortable. Denzel, you have a platform. You have influence. Don't you think you have a responsibility to acknowledge the systems that helped you succeed? That was it. That was the moment. Denzel's face transformed. The careful composure he'd been maintaining just vanished. He leaned forward, his voice rising. Systems that helped me? Do you know what it was like being a young black actor in the 1970s? Do you know how many doors were slammed in my face? How many times I was told I wasn't right for a role because of how I looked? How many times I had to prove myself over and over and over again? Joy tried to interject. Denzel, I don't think anyone here is trying to diminish your... But Denzel was done being interrupted. No, Joy, I'm going to finish. Sunny asked me a question. I'm going to answer it. I have worked for 40 years in this industry. 40 years. I have given everything I have to my craft. I have lifted up other actors. I have mentored young people trying to break into this business. I have used whatever platform I have to tell stories that matter. Stories about our community, our history, our struggles, and our triumphs. Alyssa looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Whoopi was shaking her head, clearly frustrated with where this had gone. But Sunny, incredibly, still wasn't backing down. And that's admirable, Denzel, truly. But what I'm talking about is bigger than individual achievement. I'm talking about structural inequality. I'm talking about the fact that even with all your success, there are actors who are equally talented who never got the same chances because the system wasn't designed for them. Denzel stood up. The whole audience gasped. This was unprecedented. Guests don't just stand up in the middle of an interview on The View. But Denzel was on his feet, his voice filled with an emotion that was impossible to ignore. The system wasn't designed for me either, Sunny. That's what you don't seem to understand. I didn't come from privilege. I came from hard work. I came from sacrifice. My parents sacrificed. I sacrificed. And yes, I succeeded. But don't you dare sit there and tell me that my success somehow came easy or that I didn't earn every single thing I achieved. Whoopi stood up too, holding her hands out. Okay, let's all just take a breath here. We're getting heated and we don't need to. Sunny stood up as well, her voice getting louder. I'm not saying you didn't earn it, Denzel. What I'm saying is that there are structural factors at play that we need to acknowledge. That's not an attack on you personally. That's just reality. Denzel's eyes narrowed. Reality? You want to talk about reality? The reality is that you invited me here to talk about my film, to talk about my work, and instead you decided to ambush me with accusations about privilege. That's the reality. The reality is that you're sitting here in your comfortable chair, on your successful television show, talking down to me about systems and structures while completely ignoring the fact that I've spent 4 decades fighting those very same systems. The audience was murmuring now. Some people were clapping, others looked stunned. The producers were frantically signaling from off camera, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. Joy stood up, her voice pleading. "Can we all just sit back down and talk about this calmly, please?" Sarah was nodding vigorously. "Yes, let's sit down. We can have this conversation in a respectful way." But Sunny wasn't finished. "Denzel, I understand you're upset, but you're mischaracterizing what I'm saying. I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to have an important conversation about equity in Hollywood. If you can't handle that conversation, then maybe that says something about she didn't get to finish that sentence." Denzel held up his hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stop! Just stop! I've heard enough. You know what, Sunny? You don't get to tell me what conversations I can or can't handle. You don't get to sit there and lecture me about my own life, my own experiences, my own journey. You don't get to do that." Alyssa finally spoke up, her voice shaky. "Maybe we should take a commercial break. Give everyone a chance to cool down." Whoopi nodded quickly. "That's a good idea. Let's take a break." But Denzel was already moving. He reached down and grabbed the microphone pack from his belt. His movements were deliberate, controlled, but you could see the anger radiating off him. "No commercial break necessary. I'm done here." Sunny's voice rose even higher. "Oh, so now you're just going to walk away? That's your response? To run away from an uncomfortable conversation?" Denzel turned back to face her. The look on his face was something nobody in that studio would ever forget. It was disappointment mixed with anger, frustration mixed with sadness. "I'm not running from anything, Sunny. I'm walking away from disrespect. There's a difference. You invited me here as a guest, and you treated me like I was on trial. That's not a conversation. That's an ambush." Whoopi stepped forward, reaching out toward Denzel. "Denzel, please, let's just talk about this. We can work this out." He shook his head, his voice softening just slightly when he looked at Whoopi. "Whoopi, I have nothing but respect for you. You know that. But I can't stay here and be disrespected like this. I won't." Joy was standing now too, her hands clasped together. "Denzel, we've known each other for years. Please don't leave like this." Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke. "This isn't how this was supposed to go. Please." But Sunny, incredibly, still wouldn't let it go. "So, that's it? You're going to storm off set because someone asked you a difficult question? Because someone challenged you to think about your success in a broader context?" Denzel's voice got very quiet then, the kind of quiet that's somehow louder than shouting. "Sunny, you didn't ask me a difficult question. You made an accusation. You suggested that my success was somehow unearned, that I was the beneficiary of some kind of privilege that other people didn't have. And when I tried to explain my actual lived experience, you talked over me. You dismissed me. You kept pushing your narrative no matter what I said." The audience was completely silent now. Even the crew had stopped moving. Everyone was frozen, watching this confrontation unfold. Sunny folded her arms across her chest. "I wasn't dismissing you. I was trying to have a nuanced conversation about systemic issues. If you're not willing to engage with that, then what, Sunny?" Denzel's voice was sharp now, cutting through her words. "Then what? I'm the problem? I'm the one who can't handle complex conversations? Is that what you're about to say?" Alyssa stood up quickly. "Nobody is saying that, Denzel. Nobody thinks you're the problem here." Sunny shot Alyssa a look. "I can speak for myself, Alyssa. Denzel, all I'm saying is that we need to be able to talk about these issues without people getting defensive. That's all." Denzel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Defensive? You think I'm being defensive? Sunny, you don't know the first thing about what I've been through. You don't know what it took for me to get here, and yet you sit there, comfortable in your position, telling me that I need to acknowledge my privilege. That's not having a conversation. That's being condescending." Whoopi moved between them, her voice firm. "Okay, that's enough. Both of you need to step back right now." Joy nodded. "Whoopi's right. This has gone too far. We need to end this before someone says something they really regret." But the damage was done. Denzel placed his microphone on the table with a soft thud that somehow echoed through the entire studio. "I came here in good faith. I came here to talk about a film that I poured my heart into. A film about redemption, about second chances, about the power of forgiveness. And instead, I got ambushed with accusations and lectured about my own life by someone who clearly has already made up her mind about who I am and how I got here. Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes now. Denzel, please, we're so sorry this happened. This wasn't supposed to go this way. He looked at Sarah, his expression softening for just a moment. I know you are, Sarah, and I appreciate that. But I can't stay here. I won't be disrespected like this. Not by anyone. Sunny's voice was defiant. If asking legitimate questions about systemic inequality is disrespectful to you, then maybe. Whoopi cut her off, her voice louder than anyone had heard it all morning. Sunny, stop. Just stop talking. Right now. The whole studio went silent again. Whoopi Goldberg, who almost never raised her voice like that, who always tried to keep the peace, had just shut down her co-host in front of everyone. Denzel looked at Whoopi and gave her a small nod. It was a gesture of respect, of understanding. Then he looked at Joy, at Sarah, at Alyssa. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it ended this way. And then he turned and walked off the set. His footsteps echoed through the silent studio. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his exit. The audience sat frozen, not sure whether to clap, to gasp, to do anything at all. Sunny called after him, Denzel, if you would just listen to what I'm actually saying instead of making this about. But he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt like thunder. For a long moment, nobody moved. The 5 women at the table, the crew, the audience, everyone just stood there in shocked silence. Then Whoopi slowly sat back down. She looked at the camera, her face showing every bit of the exhaustion and frustration she felt. We're going to take a break. The cameras finally stopped rolling. As soon as the red lights went off, the studio erupted. Producers rushed onto the set. Assistants were running around with phones pressed to their ears. The audience started talking all at once, everyone trying to process what they had just witnessed. Joy turned to Sunny, her voice tight. What were you thinking? What were you possibly thinking? Sunny threw her hands up. I was trying to have an important conversation. Why is everyone acting like I committed some kind of crime? Sarah's voice was shaking. That wasn't a conversation, Sunny. That was an interrogation. You backed him into a corner and kept pushing, even when it was clear he was upset. Alyssa nodded. She's right. You could see he was getting frustrated and you just kept going. Why didn't you just let it go? Whoopi stood up and walked away from the table without saying a word to anyone. Her silence was somehow more damning than anything she could have said. Sunny looked around at her co-hosts, at the crew, at everyone staring at her. You all act like I did something wrong. I asked a legitimate question. If he couldn't handle that, if he couldn't engage with the topic, that's on him, not me. Joy shook her head slowly. Sunny, he gave you an answer. He told you about his life, about his struggles, about what he's been through, and you kept pushing your own agenda instead of listening to what he was saying. That's not having a conversation. That's being stubborn and rude. One of the producers approached the table, his face red and sweaty. Do any of you have any idea what just happened? Denzel Washington just walked off our show. Denzel Washington, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, just walked off our show because of a confrontation with one of our hosts. Sarah put her head in her hands. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster. Alyssa looked like she might cry. We're never going to live this down. Never. Sunny remained defiant. I'm not apologizing for trying to have an important conversation about race and privilege in Hollywood. If people can't handle that conversation, that's a them problem, not a me problem. The producer stared at her in disbelief. A them problem? Sunny, Denzel Washington is not them. He's one of the most beloved actors of his generation. He's won 2 Academy Awards. He's a cultural icon. And you just drove him off our set. Another producer joined the conversation, her voice urgent. We need to figure out what we're going to do. We have 40 minutes of show left to fill, and we need to address what just happened. Joy looked exhausted. How do we even begin to address this? What do we say? The first producer rubbed his temples. We acknowledge what happened. We say that things got heated. We say that we respect Denzel and his decision to leave. And we move on to the next segment. Sarah wiped her eyes. Do we apologize? The second producer looked directly at Sunny. Someone needs to apologize. Sunny stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm not apologizing for asking questions that needed to be asked. I'm not apologizing for speaking truth to power. Alyssa's voice was quiet but firm. Sunny, he's not power. He's a guest. There's a difference. Backstage, Denzel was being escorted out by security, not because he was a threat, not because he had done anything wrong, but because the producers wanted to make sure he could leave without being mobbed by audience members trying to apologize, or crew members trying to get a statement, or people with cameras trying to capture his reaction. His publicist was already on the phone, her voice urgent as she did damage control, calling reporters, preparing statements, trying to get ahead of the story that was about to explode across every media outlet in the country. His assistant was frantically gathering his things from the dressing room, making sure nothing was left behind, coordinating with the car service to bring the vehicle around immediately. And Denzel himself just looked tired. The anger that had been so visible on set had faded. Now he just looked exhausted, drained, like someone who had just been through an ordeal they never wanted to experience. Not angry anymore, just tired. One of the show's assistants, a young woman who had been working on The View for less than a year, who had dreamed of working in television since she was a little girl, approached him cautiously. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Mr. Washington, I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry about what happened out there. That wasn't right. That wasn't fair to you." Denzel gave her a small, sad smile, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach your eyes. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do." She hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage, then spoke again. Her voice was quiet but sincere. "For what it's worth, I think you handled it with a lot of grace. More grace than most people would have shown in that situation. A lot more." He nodded, his eyes distant. Sometimes grace means knowing when to walk away. Back on the set, the producers had made their decision. They would come back from the commercial break, acknowledge what happened in the most neutral terms possible, and move on. No apology, no deep dive into what went wrong. Just acknowledgement and forward momentum. Whoopi returned to the table, her face unreadable. Joy, Sarah, and Alyssa took their seats. Sunny sat down last, her jaw set in a hard line. The stage manager counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, and they were back live. Whoopi looked directly into the camera. "Welcome back. As you saw before the break, our interview with Denzel Washington ended earlier than expected. Conversations about important topics can sometimes become heated. We respect Denzel's decision, and we're going to move on to our next segment." And that was it. That was all they said. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had really happened. They moved on to a cooking segment, pretending like the last 30 minutes hadn't just completely upended everything. But everyone watching knew. Everyone in that studio knew. Everyone who would hear about this in the hours and days to come would know. This wasn't just a heated conversation. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a moment where one of Hollywood's most respected figures had been pushed too far, had been disrespected too much, and had made the decision to walk away rather than continue to be treated poorly. Because at the end of the day, that's what this was really about. It wasn't about systemic inequality or Hollywood privilege or having difficult conversations. It was about respect. It was about treating a guest, any guest, with basic dignity and courtesy. It was about listening when someone tells you about their lived experience instead of talking over them with your own preconceived notions. Denzel Washington came to The View to talk about his film, to share his art, to connect with an audience. Instead, he got ambushed with accusations, lectured about his own life by someone who clearly hadn't bothered to truly understand his journey, and dismissed when he tried to defend himself and his legacy. So he did what anyone with self-respect would do. He walked away. He removed himself from a situation where he was not being treated with the dignity he deserved. And in doing so, he sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio, far beyond that show. He sent a message that no matter who you are, no matter what you've accomplished, you should never tolerate being disrespected. You should never let someone make you feel small or diminish your achievements just because they have an agenda to push. That morning on The View was supposed to be just another celebrity interview. Instead, it became a masterclass in standing up for yourself, in knowing your worth, in understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to show you basic respect. And that's a lesson that went far beyond entertainment news, far beyond celebrity gossip. That's a lesson about dignity, about self-worth, about knowing when enough is enough. That's a lesson everyone should remember.